Housewife's Confession: The Secret I Kept from My Husband for Months. In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood, Pennsylvania, 32-year-old housewife Rebecca Thornfield appears to live the perfect life with her devoted husband Marcus and their 2 young children. But beneath the surface of domestic bliss lies a secret that has been eating away at her for months. What started as a small financial mistake has spiraled into a web of deception that threatens to destroy everything she holds dear. As the weight of her hidden truth grows unbearable, Rebecca must find the courage to confront her past decisions and discover whether love and forgiveness can overcome the damage caused by months of lies. This is a story about the complexity of modern marriage, the pressure of financial expectations, and the transformative power of honest communication. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if my story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next confession. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and share it with another woman who needs to know she's not alone. Together, our voices are stronger. Chapter 1: The Perfect Facade. The morning sun filtered through the pristine white curtains of the Thornfield home on Maple Street, casting golden rays across Rebecca's carefully organized kitchen. At 32, she had mastered the art of suburban perfection. Her honey blonde hair was always styled just right, her makeup subtle but flawless, and her smile warm enough to make neighbors pause during their morning jogs to wave enthusiastically. "Mom, I can't find my soccer cleats!" 8-year-old Dylan called from upstairs, his voice carrying the particular urgency that only children could muster over missing sports equipment. "Check under your bed, sweetheart," Rebecca called back, her voice maintaining its characteristic calm despite the familiar chaos of a Wednesday morning. She smoothly flipped pancakes on the griddle while simultaneously packing lunchboxes. Turkey and Swiss for Dylan, peanut butter and strawberry jam for 5-year-old Emma, cut into heart shapes just the way she liked them. Marcus emerged from their bedroom, straightening his navy tie. At 35, her husband still made her heart skip a beat. Tall, with kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the same gentle smile that had first caught her attention at a coffee shop 9 years ago. He worked as a mid-level accountant at Peterson & Associates, bringing home a steady, if modest, salary that kept their family comfortable but required careful budgeting. "Something smells incredible down here," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and pressing a kiss to her neck. "How did I get so lucky?" Rebecca leaned back into his embrace, savoring the moment while fighting the familiar knot of guilt that had taken residence in her stomach for the past 4 months. "Just trying to keep my favorite people happy," she murmured, turning in his arms to give him a proper kiss. "Found them," Dylan announced, thundering down the stairs with his cleats in hand, his dark hair, inherited from his father, sticking up at odd angles despite Rebecca's earlier attempts to tame it with a comb. Emma followed more carefully, her small hands gripping the banister. She was Rebecca's mini-me, with the same blonde curls and bright blue eyes, but with Marcus's thoughtful, observant nature. "Mommy, can I have extra strawberries in my lunch today?" she asked, settling into her booster seat. "Of course, Princess," Rebecca replied, adding an extra handful of strawberries to Emma's lunchbox. These small requests were easy to fulfill, unlike the larger problem that kept her awake at night. The family settled into their morning routine, Marcus reading headlines from his phone while eating, Dylan wolfing down pancakes between animated descriptions of yesterday's soccer practice, and Emma carefully arranging her food into perfect patterns before taking tiny, deliberate bites. "Oh, honey," Marcus said, looking up from his phone. "I forgot to mention, my mom called last night. She wants to take the kids shopping this weekend. Maybe get them some new clothes for school." Rebecca's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Margaret Thornfield was a lovely woman, but she had expensive taste and a tendency to go overboard when shopping for her grandchildren. The kind of shopping trip that would require Rebecca to reciprocate somehow to maintain the image of the successful family they'd always projected. "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca managed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The kids would love that. I told her we'd love to take her out to dinner afterward to thank her. Maybe that new Italian place downtown. I know it's a bit pricey, but it's been a while since we've done something special." The knot in Rebecca's stomach tightened. The new Italian place Marcus was thinking of easily cost $150 for the family, money they didn't really have to spare, especially given her secret. But how could she explain that without revealing the truth she'd been hiding? "Absolutely," she heard herself saying. I'll make a reservation." After Marcus and the children left, him for his office downtown, the kids for Maplewood Elementary, Rebecca stood in her suddenly quiet kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a happy family morning. Dirty dishes waited in the sink, sticky syrup fingerprints decorated the counter, and Emma's forgotten sweater lay draped over a chair. She moved through the familiar motions of cleaning up, but her mind was elsewhere. Walking to the window that overlooked their backyard, she could see their neighbors, Janet and Bill Morrison, tending to their pristine garden. Janet waved enthusiastically, and Rebecca waved back, maintaining the facade that everything was perfectly normal. But nothing was normal. Not anymore. 4 months ago, Rebecca had made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. Marcus had been stressed about their finances. The car needed new tires, Emma's preschool tuition had increased, and Dylan's soccer fees were higher than expected. Rebecca had wanted to help, to contribute something meaningful to their family's income instead of feeling like a financial burden. She'd seen an advertisement online for a work-from-home opportunity that promised significant returns with minimal investment. It looked legitimate, professional website, testimonials from satisfied customers, and a business model that seemed to make sense. All she needed was an initial investment of $500 to get started selling premium skincare products. The problem was, they didn't have $500 to spare. Marcus managed their finances carefully, and every dollar was accounted for. But Rebecca had access to their joint savings account, the one they'd been slowly building for Emma's future college fund. She'd told herself it was just temporary, she'd make the money back quickly and return it to savings before Marcus even noticed. That was 4 months ago. The business opportunity had turned out to be a sophisticated scam. The products never arrived, the company's website disappeared overnight, and Rebecca's $500 was gone forever. But the worst part wasn't losing the money, it was the lie she'd told to cover it up. When Marcus had reviewed their bank statements the following month, he'd noticed the withdrawal. Rebecca had panicked and told him she'd use the money to buy surprise birthday gifts for his upcoming birthday, storing them at her sister's house. Marcus had been touched by her thoughtfulness and insisted she didn't need to spend so much, which only made the guilt worse. Now, 4 months later, Marcus's birthday had come and gone. Rebecca had been forced to actually spend money they couldn't afford on gifts to maintain her lie, charging $300 to their credit card for a new watch and dinner at his favorite restaurant. The original $500 had become $800 in lies, and the stress was eating her alive. She walked to the small desk in their living room where she kept track of household expenses. Hidden beneath a stack of recipes she'd printed but never tried was a notebook where she'd been desperately tracking their finances, trying to find a way to make up for her mistake without Marcus noticing. The numbers were unforgiving. Their monthly budget was tight but manageable, until you factored in the money she'd lost and the additional expenses she'd incurred covering up her mistake. She'd been skipping her monthly coffee dates with friends, claiming to be too busy. She'd been buying generic groceries instead of name brands, telling Marcus she was trying new recipes. She'd even canceled her gym membership, saying she preferred working out at home. But these small savings weren't enough. The credit card balance was growing, and she knew Marcus would notice soon. He reviewed their finances every month like clockwork, and she was running out of excuses and creative accounting. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her spiral of worry. It was her best friend, Caroline Matthews, calling from her office at the local insurance company where she worked as an agent. "Hey, Becca! How's my favorite stay-at-home supermom doing today?" Rebecca forced brightness into her voice. "Oh, living the dream. Just finished the morning routine, and now I'm contemplating whether to organize closets or deep clean the baseboards." Caroline laughed. "God, I don't know how you do it. I can barely manage to keep my apartment clean. And it's just me and Mr. Whiskers." Mr. Whiskers was Caroline's aging tabby cat, her primary companion since her divorce 2 years earlier. "Speaking of which, want to grab lunch today? I'm dying to try that new salad place on Oak Street." The invitation was tempting. Caroline was the one person who might understand Rebecca's situation. She'd been through her own financial struggles during her divorce. But lunch out meant spending money Rebecca couldn't afford, and she wasn't sure she could maintain her cheerful facade for an entire meal. "I'd love to, but I've got a mountain of laundry calling my name," Rebecca lied. "Rain check? You've been saying that a lot lately." Caroline's voice carried a note of concern. "Everything okay? You sound a little, stressed?" Rebecca's throat tightened. Caroline knew her too well. They'd been friends since college, Roommates for 3 years before Rebecca had met Marcus. If anyone would notice changes in her behavior, it would be Caroline. Just the usual mom stuff, Rebecca said carefully. Dylan's got 3 different school projects due next week, and Emma's going through a phase where she only wants to wear her princess dress. You know how it is. Actually, I don't, but I'll take your word for it, Caroline said with a chuckle. But seriously, Becca, if you need anything, someone to talk to, help with the kids, whatever, you know I'm here, right? The genuine care in Caroline's voice nearly broke Rebecca's resolve. She'd been carrying this burden alone for so long, and the offer of support was almost irresistible. But how could she explain that she'd been lying to everyone, including her husband, for months? I know, Rebecca whispered. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. After they hung up, Rebecca sat in the silence of her living room, surrounded by the evidence of her family's happiness. Family photos covered every surface. Vacations to the beach, birthday parties, Christmas mornings filled with laughter and torn wrapping paper. In every picture, she was smiling, Marcus's arm around her, their children beaming with joy. But looking at those photos now, all she could see was the lie she was living. How long could she keep this up? How much longer before Marcus noticed something was wrong? He was an accountant, for God's sake. He made his living by paying attention to financial details. The afternoon stretched ahead of her, empty except for her own thoughts and the weight of her secret. She tried to distract herself with housework, but every task felt meaningless when compared to the enormity of what she was hiding. She folded laundry while calculating how many more months she could juggle their finances. She vacuumed while rehearsing different ways to tell Marcus the truth. She prepared dinner while imagining his face when he realized she'd been lying to him for months. By the time 5:30 rolled around and she heard Marcus's key in the front door, Rebecca had worked herself into a state of barely controlled panic. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce with perhaps more vigor than necessary, when he walked into the kitchen. "Something smells amazing," he said, repeating his morning compliment but with the tired satisfaction of a man coming home after a long day. He loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, transforming from office professional back into her husband and the kid's father. "Just spaghetti," Rebecca replied, not trusting herself to say more. Marcus moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist again, a gesture so familiar and comfortable that it usually made her feel safe and loved. Today, it made her feel like a fraud. "Rough day?" he asked, noting the tension in her shoulders. Rebecca leaned back against him, closing her eyes and trying to absorb his warmth and strength. For a moment, she considered telling him everything. The scam, the money, the months of lies. But then she heard the front door bang open and Dylan's voice calling out, "Dad, Mom, I scored 2 goals at practice today." The moment was gone, lost in the beautiful chaos of their children's return home. Emma rushed in behind her brother, her backpack trailing behind her like a loyal pet, her face lit up with the particular joy of a child who had something important to share. "Mommy, guess what happened at school today?" she announced, not waiting for Rebecca to actually guess. "Tommy Sanders said girls can't be doctors, but I told him that's silly because our doctor is a girl and she's really smart." Marcus laughed, releasing Rebecca to scoop Emma into a hug. "That's my girl. Did you tell Tommy that doctors can be anyone who studies hard and wants to help people?" "Uh-huh," Emma nodded seriously. "And I told him my mommy is the smartest person I know, so she could be a doctor if she wanted to." The simple, innocent faith in Emma's voice was like a knife to Rebecca's heart. How could she possibly be the smartest person Emma knew when she'd been stupid enough to fall for an obvious scam? How could she be worthy of her daughter's admiration when she'd been lying to everyone who mattered most to her? Dinner proceeded as usual. Dylan dominated the conversation with detailed play-by-play accounts of soccer practice. Emma carefully ate around the vegetables in her spaghetti while thinking no one noticed, and Marcus asked thoughtful questions and made encouraging comments. Rebecca smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, but she felt like she was watching the scene from outside herself, like an actress who had forgotten her lines. "Oh, I almost forgot," Marcus said as they were clearing the table. "I ran into Dave Patterson at lunch today. You remember Dave from the office? He mentioned that his wife Sarah started some kind of home business, and it's going really well. Maybe you two should connect. You might be interested in something like that." Rebecca's hands stilled on the plates she was stacking. The irony was almost unbearable. "Maybe," she managed. "What kind of business?" "Something with essential oils, I think." She's apparently doing well enough that Dave said she might quit her part-time job at the dentist's office. Marcus rinsed dishes while he talked, his back to Rebecca, missing the way her face had gone pale. I thought it might be nice for you to have something like that. You know, something that's just yours. I know staying home with the kids is fulfilling, but I sometimes worry you might want something more. The kindness in his voice, his genuine concern for her happiness and fulfillment, made Rebecca's guilt exponentially worse. Here he was, encouraging her to find ways to contribute and grow, completely unaware that she'd already tried and failed spectacularly. "That's sweet of you to think of that," she whispered, unable to trust her voice to remain steady if she spoke any louder. That night, after the children were bathed and tucked into bed, after Marcus had settled into his home office to review some work files, Rebecca found herself standing in their bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror that Marcus had installed on the closet door. The woman looking back at her appeared normal. Tired, perhaps, but that was expected for a mother of 2 young children. Her blonde hair was still styled, though slightly mussed from the day's activities. Her blue eyes were clear, though shadowed with exhaustion. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a suburban housewife who had her life together. But appearances, she was learning, could be devastatingly deceptive. She could hear Marcus moving around in his office, probably reviewing budgets or preparing for tomorrow's meetings. In a few hours, he would join her in bed, kiss her goodnight, and tell her he loved her. And she would lie there in the dark, listening to his peaceful breathing, knowing that she was living a lie that grew more complicated every day. The worst part wasn't even the money anymore. $500 was significant for their family, but it wasn't insurmountable. If she confessed tomorrow, they could adjust their budget, maybe take on a small loan, and recover financially within a year. The worst part was the erosion of trust. Every day that passed without her telling the truth was another day of deception. Every smile, every "I love you," every moment of intimacy was tainted by her secret. She was stealing not just their money, but their authentic relationship. As she changed into her pajamas, a soft cotton set that Marcus had given her for Mother's Day, Rebecca made a decision. She couldn't continue like this indefinitely. The stress was affecting her sleep, her appetite, her ability to be present with her children. Something had to give. But not tonight. Tonight, she would go through the motions of being the perfect wife and mother, just as she had for the past 4 months. Tomorrow, maybe she would find the courage to begin dismantling the web of lies she'd created. Or maybe tomorrow, she would find another excuse to wait just a little longer. The uncertainty was almost as unbearable as the guilt, but it had become her constant companion, a shadow that followed her through every moment of her carefully maintained, perfect life. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 2 weeks had passed since Rebecca's resolution to find the courage to tell Marcus the truth, and she was no closer to confession than she'd been that night in their bedroom mirror. If anything, the web of deception had grown more complex, requiring increasingly creative mental gymnastics to maintain. The October morning was crisp, with the kind of golden autumn light that made Maplewood look like a postcard. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window watching the Morrisons' teenage son rake leaves in their front yard, when her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey, beautiful. Just got the credit card statement. Can we go over it tonight? Few charges I don't recognize. Love you." Her coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the tile floor. The sound seemed to echo through the house, sharp and final, like the cracking of ice on a frozen pond. "Shit," she whispered, then immediately felt guilty for cursing in her own home. She knelt to collect the ceramic pieces, her hands shaking slightly. The credit card statement. She'd been so focused on hiding the original $500 from the bank account that she'd lost track of the accumulating charges she'd been making to cover her lies. The watch for Marcus's birthday, the dinner at his favorite restaurant, the gifts she'd supposedly bought months in advance and stored at her sister's house. Gifts she'd actually had to purchase at the last minute to maintain her story. Small purchases here and there to support various excuses she'd made. It all added up to an amount that would definitely catch Marcus's attention. Her phone rang, interrupting her panic. It was her sister Jennifer calling from her home in Portland, where she worked as a freelance graphic designer. "Hey, Becca! How's life in suburbia treating you?" Rebecca closed her eyes, grateful for Jennifer's voice, but dreading any conversation that might require her to maintain her facade. At 29, Jennifer was 3 years younger, but had always been the more adventurous sister. Unmarried by choice, child-free by design, and refreshingly direct about everything. "Oh, same old routine," Rebecca managed, sweeping ceramic pieces into a dustpan while balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear. "You sound weird. Are you okay?" Jennifer had always been able to read her, even over the phone. Growing up, Rebecca had never been able to successfully lie to her sister about anything, sneaking out to parties, borrowing clothes without permission, or hiding bad grades from their parents. "Just tired. Emma had a nightmare last night and ended up sleeping between Marcus and me. You know how it is with kids." "Actually, I don't, but I'll take your word for it." Jennifer's voice carried a slight edge. "Look, I'm calling because I want to plan my Christmas visit. Should I book flights for the usual dates? December 20th through the 28th? Christmas." Rebecca hadn't even thought that far ahead, too consumed with managing her day-to-day deceptions, but Jennifer's annual visit would mean additional expenses, special meals, gifts, activities to keep her entertained. Money they didn't have, especially with their credit card balance already strained. "Of course," Rebecca heard herself saying. "The kids are already asking when Aunt Jen is coming to visit. Great. I'm excited to see Dylan and Emma, and maybe this year I can finally meet some of your neighbors. You've been talking about that Caroline woman for years, but I've never actually met her." The mention of Caroline sent another wave of anxiety through Rebecca. She'd been avoiding her best friend for weeks now, making excuses and declining invitations. Caroline had left 2 voicemails in the past week that Rebecca hadn't returned. "I'm sure that can be arranged," Rebecca said vaguely. After they hung up, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table staring at the scattered crumbs from the kids' breakfast. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like a stage set waiting for the real performance to begin. In a few hours, Dylan and Emma would come home from school full of energy and stories and demands for snacks and attention. Marcus would arrive shortly after, tired but happy to see his family, ready to dive into the evening routine of homework help and dinner preparation and bedtime stories. And somewhere in that beautiful, normal evening, she would have to explain the credit card charges to her husband. Her laptop sat on the counter where she'd left it after checking email that morning. Without really deciding to do it, Rebecca opened it and navigated to their credit card account. The numbers stared back at her, unforgiving in their digital clarity. Some $47 in charges over the past 4 months that she couldn't easily explain. Marcus was meticulous about their budget, and he would notice every unexpected expense. The birthday gifts she could explain. She'd already laid that groundwork months ago. But the other charges were harder to justify. There was the $89 she'd spent on groceries at an upscale market across town, purchased during a moment of panic when she'd realized she needed ingredients for a dinner party she'd invented to explain her absence from a lunch Caroline had suggested. The $156 at a department store for clothing she'd claimed to buy for the kids, but had actually been forced to purchase as gifts for her fictional sister-in-law's baby shower. Another lie to cover her unavailability for social commitments. $50 here, $75 there, all adding up to a mountain of deception. The worst part was how creative she'd become with her excuses. She'd invented doctor's appointments to explain her absence from volunteer activities at the kids' school. She'd claimed food poisoning to get out of a neighborhood barbecue, where her presence would have required bringing an expensive side dish. She'd even told Marcus she was taking an online course to explain her distracted behavior, which had led to him proudly telling his coworkers about his wife's commitment to self-improvement. Each lie had seemed necessary at the time, a small bridge across an uncomfortable truth. But now she could see that she'd built an elaborate maze of deception, and she was lost somewhere in the middle of it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Caroline, and Rebecca knew she couldn't avoid the call any longer. "Rebecca Thornfield, where the hell have you been?" Caroline's voice was half joking, half genuinely concerned. "I've left you like 100 messages." "I know. I'm sorry. Things have just been crazy lately." "Crazy how? Dylan and Emma are in school all day, Marcus is at work, and you're home. What kind of crazy are we talking about?" Caroline's directness was both refreshing and terrifying. She had a way of cutting through social niceties to get to the heart of things, a quality that made her an excellent friend and a dangerous person to lie to. "Just busy," Rebecca said lamely. "You know how it is." "No, actually, I don't know how it is, because you won't talk to me." Caroline's voice softened. "Becca, I'm worried about you. You've been avoiding everyone for weeks. Even Janet Morrison asked me if everything was okay with you guys. The mention of their neighbor made Rebecca's stomach clench. If Janet had noticed changes in her behavior, then her carefully maintained facade was cracking more than she'd realized. "Everything's fine," Rebecca said automatically, but even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. "Bullshit." Caroline's voice was firm but kind. "Look, I'm coming over. Right now, we're going to sit down and you're going to tell me what's really going on." "No!" The word came out sharper than Rebecca intended. "I mean, I'm not home. I'm running errands." "What errands? Where?" Rebecca's mind went blank. She was sitting in her own kitchen, still in her pajamas, surrounded by the evidence of her normal morning routine. But she couldn't admit that to Caroline, not when she was so close to figuring out that something was seriously wrong. "The grocery store," she said finally. "Which one? I'll meet you there." "Caroline, please. I just need some space right now, okay? I promise I'll call you later this week and we'll catch up properly." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Caroline spoke again, her voice was quieter, more serious than Rebecca had heard in months. "Becca, whatever's going on, you know you can tell me, right? I mean, we've been friends for over a decade. There's nothing you could say that would shock me or make me judge you. Nothing." The sincerity in Caroline's voice nearly broke Rebecca's resolve. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to tell someone the truth, to say the words out loud, to stop carrying this burden alone. But then she imagined Caroline's reaction, the pity and disappointment, and the moment passed. "I know," Rebecca whispered. I need to handle some things on my own right now." After they hung up, Rebecca felt more isolated than ever. She'd always prided herself on her friendships, her ability to maintain close connections with the people she cared about. But her secret had created a wall between her and everyone in her life, including the person who knew her best. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rebecca tried to distract herself with housework, but every task felt pointless when she knew that evening would bring a reckoning she wasn't prepared for. She folded laundry with mechanical precision, her mind cycling through possible explanations for the credit card charges. She cleaned bathrooms while rehearsing different ways to deflect Marcus's questions. She organized closets while calculating how much longer she could maintain her elaborate network of lies. When 3:15 arrived and it was time to pick up the kids from school, Rebecca was almost grateful for the distraction. The familiar chaos of the school pickup line, surrounded by other parents making small talk and children exploding out of the building with backpacks trailing behind them, felt like a return to normalcy. Dylan appeared first, as always, his face flushed from recess and his hair sticking up at impossible angles. He threw himself into the car with the kind of dramatic flair that only 8-year-olds could muster. "Mom, you'll never guess what happened today," he announced, not bothering with a greeting. Kevin Martinez brought his hamster to school for show and tell, and it escaped. Mrs. Peterson had to crawl under all the desks to catch it, and when she stood up, her hair was all messy and she had dust bunnies stuck to her sweater. Despite her anxiety, Rebecca found herself smiling at Dylan's enthusiasm. Her children had a way of pulling her into the present moment, forcing her to set aside her worries and focus on their immediate needs and concerns. Emma climbed into her car seat more carefully, her backpack organized and her jacket properly zipped. "Mommy, can we have mac and cheese for dinner? The good kind with the breadcrumbs on top?" "We'll see, sweetheart," Rebecca replied, pulling out of the pickup line and into traffic. The good mac and cheese Emma was referring to was a recipe that required several expensive ingredients they couldn't afford right now. "How was your day?" "Good. We learned about butterflies and how they change from caterpillars. Did you know they eat their old skin when they're changing?" "That's pretty gross, Em," Dylan interjected from the front seat, "but also kind of cool." Rebecca listened to her children chatter about their day, their voices weaving together in the familiar symphony of siblings who were best friends and worst enemies depending on the hour. For a few minutes, she could almost forget about the conversation waiting for her at home, the credit card statement that would force her to choose between confession and more elaborate deception. But the feeling of normalcy shattered as they pulled into their driveway and she saw Marcus's car already there. He was home early, which was unusual and probably meant he wanted extra time to review their finances. "Dad's home!" Emma cheered, unbuckling her car seat with the speed of a child who had mastered the process through months of practice. "Why is Daddy home early?" Dylan asked, more observant than his sister about deviations from routine. "Maybe he missed us," Rebecca said lightly, though her stomach was churning. Marcus appeared in the doorway before they'd even finished gathering backpacks and lunchboxes from the car. He was still wearing his work clothes, but had loosened his tie, and his smile was warm and genuine as he watched his children race toward him. "There are my favorite people," he said, opening his arms to catch both kids in a group hug. "I finished my project early and decided to come home and spend some extra time with my family." Over the children's heads, his eyes met Rebecca's, and she saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. It wasn't suspicion exactly, but it was more serious than his usual after-work demeanor. He knew something was wrong. The next few hours passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Rebecca helped Dylan with his math homework, while Emma played with her dolls in the living room. Marcus started dinner, humming while he cooked, a habit he'd picked up during their early dating years that usually made Rebecca feel loved and secure. Tonight, it sounded ominous, like the calm before a storm. They ate dinner as a family, discussing Dylan's upcoming science project and Emma's excitement about a field trip to the zoo next week. But beneath the surface conversation, Rebecca could feel the weight of unspoken tension. Marcus kept glancing at her with a concerned expression, and she knew he was waiting for the children to go to bed so they could talk privately. After Dylan and Emma were finally settled in their rooms, a process that involved 3 glasses of water, 2 forgotten stuffed animals, and 1 extended negotiation about weekend screen time, Rebecca and Marcus found themselves alone in their living room. The credit card statement lay on the coffee table between them like evidence at a crime scene. "So," Marcus said gently, settling onto the couch beside her, "want to help me understand some of these charges?" Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Rebecca stared at the credit card statement as if it might transform into something less threatening if she concentrated hard enough. The numbers seemed to pulse on the page, each charge a small betrayal, each date a reminder of how long she'd been living this lie. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne, the same scent he'd worn since their wedding day. His presence, usually a source of comfort, now felt overwhelming. She could sense his confusion, his genuine desire to understand, and it made her deception feel even more unbearable. "I know some of these charges look unusual," she began carefully, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. "But I can explain most of them." Marcus nodded encouragingly, his brown eyes patient behind his glasses. This was his work face, calm, analytical, focused on problem-solving rather than judgment. It was the same expression he wore when helping Dylan with difficult homework or troubleshooting issues with their home computer. "This one," he said, pointing to a 156 charge at Nordstrom from 6 weeks ago. "I don't remember you mentioning shopping there, and it's not your usual style to spend that much at once." Rebecca's mouth felt dry. The Nordstrom charge was for gifts she'd supposedly bought for her fictional sister-in-law's baby shower, an event she'd invented to explain why she couldn't attend Caroline's birthday dinner. The lie had seemed manageable at the time, but now, faced with Marcus's direct question, she could see how flimsy her story was. "That was for Sarah's baby shower," she said, referring to the wife of Marcus's coworker, Dave Patterson. The lie came easily. She'd been rehearsing it for weeks. "Remember? I told you about it. She's having a girl, and I wanted to get something really nice." Marcus frowned slightly. "I thought Dave said the baby shower was next month." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd gotten her fictional timeline confused, mixing up real events with invented ones. This was exactly what she'd feared. The moment when her carefully constructed lies would begin to contradict each other. "Oh, that's a different shower," she said quickly. "This was for my friend Sarah from college. You don't know her well." As soon as the words left her mouth, she realized she'd made another mistake. Marcus had an excellent memory, especially for people and details. He would remember if she'd mentioned a close enough friend from college to spend $156 on baby shower gifts. "Sarah from college?" Marcus's voice carried a note of confusion. "I don't think you've ever mentioned her before." The walls of the living room seemed to be closing in. Rebecca could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of Dylan talking to himself in his bedroom, the ordinary sounds of their home life continuing around them while her world began to collapse. "We reconnected on Facebook," she said desperately. "You know how it is with old friends? Sometimes you lose touch and then suddenly you're back in contact." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the credit card statement with the same focused attention he brought to his work. Rebecca watched his face, trying to read his thoughts, terrified of what she might see there. "Okay," he said finally. What about this one? $89 at Whole Foods on a Tuesday afternoon. That's not where we usually shop, and it's a lot more than our typical grocery budget. This charge was even harder to explain. She'd made the purchase during a moment of panic when she'd realized she needed expensive ingredients for a dinner party she'd invented to explain her absence from a lunch date with Caroline. But she couldn't tell Marcus about the fictional dinner party without creating even more lies. "I was trying a new recipe," she said weakly. "For that book club meeting I told you about." "What book club?" Marcus asked, his confusion deepening. "Honey, you haven't been to a book club in over a year." Rebecca felt the room spinning slightly. She'd completely forgotten that she'd stopped attending her actual book club months ago, unable to afford the monthly restaurant meetings where they discussed their selections. Now she was claiming to attend a book club that didn't exist, for people she'd never mentioned, to explain groceries she'd bought for a dinner party she'd never hosted. "It's a new one," she whispered, but even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. Marcus set the credit card statement down on the coffee table and turned to face her fully. His expression had shifted from confusion to something more serious. Not anger, but deep concern. "Rebecca," he said gently, using her full name in the way he only did during important conversations. "What's really going on here? These explanations don't make sense, and you seem really stressed about this conversation." The kindness in his voice was her undoing. For 4 months, she'd been preparing for anger, accusations, demands for answers. She'd armored herself against his potential fury, ready to defend herself or deflect blame. But she hadn't prepared for this. His gentle concern, his obvious worry for her well-being, his assumption that whatever was wrong could be solved together. Tears began to fall before she even realized she was crying. Once they started, she couldn't stop them. Months of suppressed anxiety, guilt, and fear poured out of her in ugly, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Marcus immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while she fell apart. He didn't ask questions or demand explanations. He simply held her, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing nonsense words the way he did when the children had nightmares. "It's okay," he whispered. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. It's okay." But it wasn't okay, and Rebecca knew that once she told him the truth, nothing would be okay again. Their marriage was built on trust, on honesty, on partnership. She'd violated all of those principles, and she couldn't imagine how they could recover from such a fundamental betrayal. When her sobs finally subsided, Marcus pulled back slightly to look at her face. His eyes were filled with concern, but also with love. The same love she'd seen there on their wedding day, when Dylan was born, during countless small moments over their 9 years together. "Talk to me," he said simply. "Please." Rebecca took a shuddering breath, wiping her eyes with the tissue Marcus handed her. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no more room for lies or deflection. She had to choose between destroying their marriage with continued deception or risking it with honest confession. "I lost $500, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 months ago. I took it from our savings account without telling you, and I lost it." Marcus was very still, processing her words. Lost it how? The shame was almost unbearable, but Rebecca forced herself to continue. "There was this business opportunity I saw online. It seemed legitimate, selling skincare products from home. I thought I could make some money to help with our expenses, maybe contribute something meaningful instead of just being a burden." "A burden." Marcus's voice was sharp with surprise. "Rebecca, you're not a burden. You take care of our children, our home, our entire lives. How could you think you're a burden?" "Because I don't make any money." The words exploded out of her, years of insecurity and self-doubt finally finding voice. "You work all day to support us, and I spend money. I spend your money on groceries and clothes for the kids, and gas for the car, and I never contribute anything financial to our family." Marcus stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You contribute everything else. You contribute our entire life, but not money," Rebecca said miserably. "And when things got tight, when you were stressed about the budget, I wanted to help. I wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. So you invested our savings in an online business opportunity," Marcus said slowly, still trying to understand. "It wasn't supposed to be an investment. It was supposed to be easy money. $500 to get started, and then I'd make it back quickly. I was going to replace the money before you even noticed it was gone. But it didn't work out that way. Rebecca shook her head, fresh tears starting to fall. It was a scam. The company disappeared overnight. The products never came. The $500 was just gone. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, controlled. That was 4 months ago. Why didn't you tell me then? This was the hardest part, explaining the lies, the cover-ups, the elaborate deception she'd created to hide her mistake. Because I was ashamed, because I felt so stupid for falling for it, and because when you noticed the missing money, I panicked and told you I'd spent it on birthday gifts for you? Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes, followed quickly by hurt. So, when my birthday came and you gave me that expensive watch, I had to actually buy gifts to make the lie true, Rebecca finished, which meant spending more money we didn't have. And then I had to make up stories to explain all these other charges, and every lie required more lies, and I got lost in it. Marcus stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked their front yard. Rebecca watched his back, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. She'd never seen him truly angry before. Marcus was naturally even-tempered, more likely to withdraw and think than to explode with emotion. 4 months, he said to the window. 4 months of lying to me. 4 months of making up stories about book clubs and baby showers and college friends I've never heard of. Marcus, 4 months of me telling people at work how proud I am of my wife, how she's taking online courses and starting new friendships, and being so thoughtful with surprise gifts. His voice was getting tighter, more controlled. 4 months of me feeling grateful that you were happy and fulfilled, when really you were lying to me every single day. Rebecca had never heard such pain in his voice. She'd expected anger, but this was worse. This was betrayal, disappointment, the sound of trust breaking in real time. I wanted to tell you, she said desperately. So many times I almost told you, but I was scared. I was scared you'd be angry, scared you'd lose trust in me, scared you'd think I was stupid. Marcus turned around then, and Rebecca saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Stupid? Rebecca, people get scammed every day. Smart people, careful people. That's not what hurts. Then what? She whispered. What hurts is that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. What hurts is that you've been carrying this alone instead of letting me help you. What hurts is that for 4 months, every time you said I love you, there was this huge lie sitting between us. The truth of his words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the financial aspects of her deception that she hadn't fully considered the emotional damage she was causing. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of intimacy had been tainted by her secret. I'm so sorry, she said, but the words felt inadequate. Marcus, I'm so incredibly sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please don't give up on us. Marcus sank back onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm not giving up on us, he said quietly. But I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to trust what you're telling me now when you've been lying to me for months. The question hung in the air between them. How do you rebuild trust after such a fundamental betrayal? How do you move forward when the foundation of your relationship has been damaged? Is there anything else? Marcus asked. Any other lies I should know about? Rebecca thought frantically through the past 4 months, cataloging every deception, every creative excuse, every fictional event she'd invented. I've been avoiding Caroline because I couldn't afford to go out with her, but I told her I was too busy. I canceled my gym membership, but told you I preferred working out at home. I've been buying generic groceries and telling you I was experimenting with new recipes. She paused, then added quietly, and I've been so stressed that I haven't been sleeping well. But when you asked, I said I was fine. So not just financial lies, Marcus said. Lies about your feelings, your friendships, your daily life. I was trying to protect you, Rebecca said weakly. I didn't want you to worry, but that's not your decision to make, Marcus replied, and there was a firmness in his voice that Rebecca had never heard before. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to face problems together. You don't get to decide what I can and can't handle, what I should and shouldn't know about our life." Rebecca knew he was right, but hearing it stated so clearly made her feel even worse about her choices. She told herself she was being selfless, protecting Marcus from additional stress and worry. But really, she'd been protecting herself from his disappointment, his potential anger, the consequences of her own poor judgment. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at their family photos on the mantel, pictures of happier times when their biggest concern was whether Dylan would sit still long enough for a decent Christmas card photo. "I don't know," he said finally. "I need time to think. I need to figure out how to trust you again." The words were like ice water in Rebecca's veins. She'd feared his anger, but this quiet uncertainty was somehow worse. Anger could be weathered, worked through, resolved. But broken trust was a more complex problem, one that couldn't be fixed with apologies and promises. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. I need you to promise me that there will be no more lies. Ever. About anything." Marcus's voice was steady, but Rebecca could hear the pain underneath. "I need to know that when you tell me you love me, or that you had a good day, or that you're happy, you're telling me the truth." "I promise," Rebecca said immediately. "Marcus, I swear to you, no more lies. About anything. And I need to take over the finances completely for a while. All of them. Credit cards, bank accounts, budgeting, everything. I need to know exactly where we stand and what we're dealing with." Rebecca nodded, though the thought of giving up even that small measure of independence was painful. But she'd forfeited the right to financial autonomy when she'd violated their trust. "And we need to talk to Caroline," Marcus continued. "She's been your best friend for years, and you've been lying to her too. She deserves to know why you've been pulling away." The thought of confessing to Caroline, of seeing the disappointment in her eyes, made Rebecca's stomach clench. But Marcus was right. Her web of lies had damaged more than just their marriage. "Okay," she whispered. Marcus stood up again, this time moving toward the stairs. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. I need some space to process all of this." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. In 9 years of marriage, Marcus had never slept anywhere but their bed. Even during their worst arguments, fights about his long work hours, disagreements about discipline for the children, stress over money, they'd always worked things out before bedtime. "Marcus, please. This isn't about punishment," he said, but his voice was tired. "This is about me needing space to think. I can't lie next to you tonight and pretend everything is normal when I'm still trying to understand how we got here." Rebecca watched him climb the stairs, each step taking him further away from her. She sat alone in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. Family photos, Dylan's artwork displayed on the refrigerator, Emma's stuffed animals scattered on the carpet, and felt like a stranger in her own home. The credit card statement still lay on the coffee table, the cause of her confession, and possibly the catalyst for the end of her marriage. She picked it up, staring at the numbers that had seemed so insurmountable an hour ago. Now they seemed almost trivial compared to the emotional damage she'd caused. Upstairs, she could hear Marcus moving around in the guest room, getting ready for bed. The sounds were familiar but wrong. His footsteps in an unfamiliar room, the squeak of a mattress that wasn't theirs, the click of a light switch that would leave her sleeping alone for the first time in years. Rebecca turned off the living room lights and made her way upstairs, pausing outside the guest room door. She could see light underneath, could hear Marcus settling into the unfamiliar bed. She raised her hand to knock, to say something, to try once more to bridge the gap between them. But then the light went out, and Rebecca was left standing in the dark hallway, more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Chapter 4. The Path to Redemption. 3 days had passed since Rebecca's confession, and the Thornfield house felt like a place where strangers happened to share the same address. Marcus was polite but distant, speaking to her only when necessary and always with a careful formality that was somehow worse than anger would have been. He'd taken over all financial responsibilities as promised, quietly reviewing bank statements and credit card bills in his home office after the children went to bed. Rebecca had been existing in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of her daily routine while feeling like she was watching her life from the outside. She made breakfast, packed lunches, helped with homework, and tucked the children into bed, all while carrying the weight of uncertainty about her marriage's future. The kids, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the tension. 8-year-old Dylan was too focused on his upcoming science fair project to notice that his parents were barely speaking to each other. 5-year-old Emma was absorbed in her elaborate imaginary games, turning the living room into various kingdoms where she ruled as princess, doctor, or teacher, depending on her mood. But Rebecca knew that children were more perceptive than adults often gave them credit for. How long before Dylan asked why Daddy was sleeping in the guest room? How long before Emma noticed that Mommy and Daddy weren't sharing their usual morning coffee ritual or evening conversations on the couch? On Thursday evening, while Marcus was upstairs helping Dylan with his math homework, Rebecca's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. It was Caroline, and Rebecca knew she couldn't avoid her best friend any longer. "Hey," Rebecca answered, trying to inject normalcy into her voice. "Don't hey me," Caroline said, her tone a mixture of frustration and concern. "I just ran into Marcus at the grocery store, and he looked like hell. He was polite but weird, and when I asked about you, he just said you'd been going through a rough patch. What the hell is going on, Becca?" Rebecca closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. She'd known this moment would come. Caroline was too observant and too persistent to be put off indefinitely, but knowing it was inevitable didn't make it any easier. "Can you come over?" Rebecca asked quietly. "There's something I need to tell you." 20 minutes later, Caroline stood in Rebecca's kitchen, still wearing her work clothes from the insurance office. A navy blazer and matching skirt that made her look professional and competent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her green eyes were sharp with concern as she studied Rebecca's face. "You look terrible," Caroline said bluntly, which was her way of expressing affection. "When's the last time you actually slept?" Rebecca gestured toward the kitchen table, where she'd already prepared coffee for both of them. Caroline's with cream and 2 sugars, just the way she'd liked it since college. The familiar ritual felt almost normal, a brief return to their easy friendship before everything had become complicated. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca began, settling into her usual chair across from Caroline. "And I need you to hear the whole story before you say anything, okay?" Caroline's expression shifted from casual concern to serious attention. She'd been Rebecca's friend long enough to recognize the tone that preceded important revelations. "I'm listening." Rebecca took a deep breath and began the story she'd told Marcus 3 days earlier. The online scam, the lost money, the months of lies that had followed. But telling Caroline felt different than confessing to Marcus. With her husband, the focus had been on the betrayal of their marriage, the violation of trust between spouses. With Caroline, Rebecca found herself explaining the loneliness, the isolation, the way her secret had cut her off from everyone she cared about. "That's why I've been avoiding you," Rebecca finished. "Every time you wanted to meet for lunch or go shopping or just hang out, I either couldn't afford it or I was too stressed to pretend everything was normal. It was easier to make excuses than to keep lying to your face." Caroline had listened to the entire story without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something that might have been relief. When Rebecca finished, Caroline reached across the table and took her friend's hands. "You idiot," Caroline said, but her voice was gentle. "You absolute idiot." "I know," Rebecca whispered, tears threatening again. "I know I'm stupid. I know I messed everything up." "No, that's not what I mean." Caroline squeezed Rebecca's hands tighter. "I mean, you're an idiot for thinking you had to handle this alone, for thinking I would judge you for getting scammed or for making a financial mistake. Do you have any idea how many times I've done something similar?" Rebecca looked up in surprise. Caroline had always seemed so put together, so financially responsible, especially since her divorce. "Remember when I was going through my divorce?" Caroline continued. "Remember how I spent $3,000 on a lawyer who turned out to be completely incompetent? Money I didn't have for services that made my situation worse instead of better?" Rebecca did remember. Caroline had mentioned the bad lawyer, but she'd never talked about the financial impact or the emotional toll of that mistake. "And what about the time I invested my entire savings in that startup my ex-brother-in-law was launching? The one that folded 6 months later and took my money with it?" Caroline shook her head. "Smart people make dumb financial decisions all the time, Becca. That's not the problem." "Then what is?" "The problem is that you've been carrying this guilt and shame for months instead of letting the people who love you help you figure it out." Caroline's green eyes were intense, focused. The problem is that you thought so little of your marriage and your friendships that you assumed we'd abandon you over money. The words stung because they contained more truth than Rebecca wanted to acknowledge. She had assumed the worst about the people she loved most, had projected her own shame onto them, and decided they would react with judgment and disappointment. "Marcus is barely speaking to me," Rebecca said quietly. "He's sleeping in the guest room. I think our marriage might be over." Caroline was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "How long has it been since you told him?" 3 days. "And he's still sleeping in the guest room?" Rebecca nodded miserably. Caroline leaned back in her chair, studying Rebecca's face with the analytical expression she used when evaluating insurance claims. "Okay, here's what I think is happening. Marcus isn't angry about the money. $500 is significant for your budget, but it's not marriage-ending money. He's heard about the lies, about being shut out, about realizing that his wife has been struggling alone for months when he thought everything was fine. So what do I do?" Rebecca asked. "How do I fix this?" "You start by giving him time to process. 3 days isn't very long when you're dealing with a fundamental shift in how you understand your marriage." Caroline took a sip of her coffee, thinking. "And you start by being completely transparent about everything else. No more secrets, no more protecting him from difficult truths." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a sweater, and his hair was slightly mussed from helping Dylan with his project. He looked surprised to see Caroline there, but not displeased. "Hi, Caroline," he said politely. "I didn't know you were coming over." "I invited myself," Caroline replied with characteristic directness. "I was concerned about both of you." Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, maintaining physical distance from the table where the women sat. The gesture wasn't hostile, but it was telling. He was present but not fully engaged, participating but not committed. "Rebecca told me what happened," Caroline continued, "about the money and the other stuff." Marcus nodded but didn't respond immediately. Rebecca watched his face, trying to read his thoughts, desperate for some sign of what he was feeling. "I keep trying to understand when everything changed," Marcus said finally, speaking more to his coffee cup than to either woman. "When my wife started feeling like she couldn't talk to me about problems. When she started thinking that lying was a better option than asking for help." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Rebecca felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over her. She'd been so focused on her own shame and fear that she hadn't fully considered how her secrecy had affected Marcus's sense of himself as a husband and partner. "It wasn't about you," Rebecca said softly. "It was never about thinking you wouldn't help or wouldn't understand. It was about me feeling ashamed and stupid and not wanting you to see me that way. But that's exactly the problem," Marcus replied, finally looking at her directly. "You decided what I could and couldn't handle. You decided what kind of husband I was without giving me the chance to prove otherwise." Caroline watched this exchange with the focused attention of someone who understood she was witnessing a crucial moment in her friend's marriage. She didn't interrupt or offer advice. She simply provided a supportive presence while they worked through their pain. "You're right," Rebecca said, and she could hear the strength returning to her voice. "I made assumptions about how you'd react, and I made decisions that should have been ours to make together. I took away your right to be my partner." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, echoing the same question Rebecca had posed 3 days earlier. "Now we figure out how to rebuild," Caroline interjected gently. "Both of you. Rebecca learns how to be completely honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Marcus learns how to trust again, even when it's scary." Marcus set down his coffee cup and moved to sit at the table with them, the first time he'd voluntarily closed the physical distance since Rebecca's confession. It was a small gesture, but Rebecca felt a flutter of hope. "I've been thinking about practical steps," Marcus said, "ways we can move forward that feel safe for both of us." Rebecca nodded eagerly, grateful that he was thinking about solutions rather than just problems. "I want us to meet with a financial counselor," Marcus continued, "someone who can help us create a budget that works for our actual situation, not the one we've been pretending to have." "Okay," Rebecca agreed immediately, "and I think we should consider marriage counseling. Not because I want to end our marriage, but because I want to understand how we got to a place where you felt like lying was your only option." The fact that Marcus was talking about wanting to save their marriage, not end it, made Rebecca's eyes fill with tears of relief. "Yes," she whispered. "Whatever you think will help. And," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want you to start looking for part-time work. Not because we desperately need the money, but because I think you need to feel like you're contributing financially. I should have realized that was important to you." This suggestion surprised Rebecca. She'd been a stay-at-home mother for so long that the idea of returning to work felt both exciting and terrifying. "What about the kids?" she asked. "We'll figure it out," Marcus replied. "Daycare for Emma, after-school care for Dylan. It'll be an adjustment, but if it makes you feel more fulfilled, then it's worth it." Caroline had been quietly observing this conversation, and now she spoke up. "You know, I've been thinking about hiring a part-time assistant at the insurance office. Someone who could handle client calls and basic paperwork. The pay isn't amazing, but the hours are flexible, and you could probably work around the kids' schedules." The offer was unexpected and generous, but Rebecca hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Mixing friendship and business?" "We'll set clear boundaries," Caroline said firmly, "but honestly, I think it could be good for both of us. You need work that gives you flexibility and financial independence. I need help that doesn't require me to train a complete stranger." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a good opportunity." They talked for another hour, making concrete plans for moving forward. Marcus would research financial counselors and marriage counselors. Rebecca would call Caroline on Monday to discuss the part-time job opportunity. They would sit down with the children over the weekend and explain, in age-appropriate terms, that Mommy and Daddy were working through some grown-up problems, but that they loved each other and their family very much. When Caroline finally left, Rebecca and Marcus found themselves alone in their kitchen for the first time since the night of her confession. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of two people who were trying to figure out how to be together again. "I miss you," Rebecca said quietly. Marcus was loading coffee cups into the dishwasher, his back to her, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly at her words. "I miss you too," he replied, "but missing you and trusting you are different things right now." The honesty stung, but Rebecca was grateful for it. This was what she'd asked for. Complete transparency, even when it was uncomfortable. "How long do you think it will take?" she asked. "To trust me again?" Marcus turned around to face her, and she could see that he'd been struggling with the same question. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to try. I want us to get back to a place where we can be completely honest with each other, where we can face problems together instead of separately." "I want that too," Rebecca said. "More than anything." "Then we'll work on it," Marcus replied. "One day at a time." That night, Marcus returned to their bedroom for the first time in 3 days. They didn't make love. They weren't ready for that level of intimacy yet. But they lay side by side in the dark, not touching, but present with each other. "Rebecca?" Marcus's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah? Next time you're scared or ashamed or feeling like you can't handle something alone, will you come to me first, before you try to solve it yourself?" "Yes," she promised, and she meant it completely. No more secrets, no more lies, no matter how hard the truth is to say, even if you think I'll be disappointed in you. Even then. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then reached across the space between them to take her hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, not romantic, but reconnective, a small bridge across the gap that had opened between them. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Rebecca replied, squeezing his hand. "And I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that to you." Outside their bedroom window, the neighborhood was settling into quiet for the night. Other families were going through their bedtime routines, tucking children into bed, having final conversations before sleep. Rebecca had spent months feeling isolated from this normal world, cut off by her secrets and lies. But lying there in the dark with Marcus's hand in hers, she felt the first stirrings of hope that she might find her way back to belonging. Not just in her community, but in her own life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, she wasn't walking it alone. The path to rebuilding trust would be long and sometimes difficult. There would be moments of progress and setbacks, conversations that brought them closer and others that reminded them how much work remained. But they would face it together, as partners, as a family, as two people who loved each other enough to fight for their future. And that, Rebecca realized, was more than enough to begin with. Epilogue. 6 months later. The spring morning was warm with promise as Rebecca sat in her car outside Caroline's insurance office, reviewing her client notes for the day. 6 months had passed since the night she'd confessed everything to Marcus, and while their marriage was still a work in progress, she could honestly say she was happier than she'd been in years. The part-time job had been exactly what she needed. Meaningful work that used her organizational skills and people-focused nature, flexible hours that allowed her to be present for Dylan and Emma, and a steady paycheck that contributed to their family's financial stability. More importantly, it had given her back her sense of purpose and independence. Marcus's car pulled into the parking space next to hers. They'd been meeting for lunch once a week, a deliberate effort to maintain their connection during this rebuilding phase of their relationship. These lunch dates had become sacred time, protected from work stress and parenting responsibilities, dedicated solely to talking and reconnecting as husband and wife. "How was your morning?" Marcus asked as they walked into the small cafe they'd discovered a few blocks from both their offices. "Good," Rebecca replied, settling into their usual booth by the window. Mrs. Henderson called about her homeowner's policy, and I was actually able to help her understand why her rates increased. She was so grateful to have someone explain it clearly, instead of just sending her a form letter. Marcus smiled, the genuine smile that had been missing for so many months, but had gradually returned as they'd worked through their problems together. "I love seeing you this happy about work. You're good at helping people." Their relationship was different now. More intentional, more honest, but also more fragile in some ways. They'd learned not to take their communication for granted, to check in with each other regularly, to address small concerns before they became larger problems. It required more effort than their previous easy companionship, but it also felt more solid, built on truth rather than assumptions. "How's the new budget working out?" Rebecca asked, referring to the financial plan they'd developed with their counselor 3 months earlier. "Really well, actually," Marcus replied. "Having everything transparent and planned out removes so much stress, and knowing exactly what we can afford means we can enjoy the things we spend money on instead of worrying about them." They'd paid off the credit card debt gradually, cutting back on some expenses, but finding creative ways to maintain their quality of life. Dylan had learned to cook simple meals, turning it into a game rather than a chore. Emma had discovered that library books were just as exciting as new ones. The family had started taking walks in the neighborhood instead of expensive outings, and they'd all been surprised by how much they enjoyed these simple adventures. "Speaking of which," Marcus continued, "I've been thinking about that vacation we talked about. Not this summer, but maybe next year. What would you think about a camping trip? The kids would love it, and it's something we could actually afford." The casual way he included her in financial planning still sometimes surprised Rebecca. For months, she'd been shut out of these decisions as part of rebuilding trust. But gradually, as she'd proven her commitment to transparency, Marcus had begun including her again in their family's financial future. "I think that sounds wonderful," she replied. "Emma's been asking about s'mores ever since Dylan learned about them at scout camp." Their food arrived, simple sandwiches and soup that fit comfortably within their lunch budget. As they ate, they talked about Dylan's upcoming soccer tournament, Emma's excitement about starting kindergarten in the fall, and their plans for Marcus's birthday next month. "Simple celebration this year," Marcus said with a grin, referencing the elaborate birthday gifts that had started Rebecca's web of lies. "Maybe dinner at home and a movie with the kids." "Perfect," Rebecca agreed, and she meant it. The pressure to create perfect moments and expensive gestures had been replaced by an appreciation for genuine connection and honest communication. After lunch, as they walked back to their cars, Marcus took Rebecca's hand, a gesture that had become natural again only in recent weeks. "I'm proud of you," he said suddenly. "I know this hasn't been easy, rebuilding everything from scratch, but you've been so committed to doing the work, to being honest even when it's uncomfortable." Rebecca squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar rush of gratitude that had become her dominant emotion. Gratitude that Marcus had been willing to fight for their marriage, that Caroline had offered friendship without judgment, that her children had adjusted to the changes in their family with resilience and love. "I'm proud of us," she replied. "6 months ago, I thought I'd destroyed everything that mattered to me. Now I feel like we have something stronger than we ever had before." "Different anyway," Marcus agreed. "More honest." That evening, as Rebecca helped Emma with a puzzle while Dylan practiced piano and Marcus prepared dinner, she reflected on how much their family dynamics had changed. The children had adapted to having a mother who worked outside the home, learning independence and flexibility. Marcus had embraced more domestic responsibilities, discovering that he actually enjoyed cooking. Rebecca had found a balance between contributing to their family's income and being present for the moments that mattered most. But perhaps the biggest change was in Rebecca herself. The woman who had been so afraid of imperfection that she'd chosen lies over truth was learning to embrace vulnerability as strength. She'd stopped trying to be the perfect wife and mother, focusing instead on being authentic and present. "Mommy," Emma said, holding up a puzzle piece, "I can't find where this goes." "Let's look together," Rebecca replied, sitting down beside her daughter. Sometimes the pieces that don't seem to fit anywhere are exactly what we need to complete the picture. As Emma giggled and tried the piece in different spots, Rebecca realized that the same truth applied to her own life. The broken pieces, the financial mistake, the lies, the months of secrecy had seemed like irreparable damage. But working through them honestly had ultimately created something stronger and more beautiful than what had existed before. "Found it!" Emma announced triumphantly, placing the puzzle piece perfectly into the growing picture of a butterfly garden. It was exactly where it needed to be. Rebecca smiled, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes patience and looking at things from a different angle." Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed and the kitchen was clean, Rebecca and Marcus sat together on their living room couch, the same couch where she'd confessed her secret 6 months earlier. But everything about the moment felt different now. Marcus's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, both of them reading separate books but sharing the comfortable silence of a couple who had learned to be at peace together. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "How did lunch go today? You two looked happy when I saw you walking back to the office." She smiled, typing back, "Really good. Thank you for giving us this chance to rebuild. I couldn't have done it without you." Caroline's response was immediate. "That's what friends are for. Besides, you're the best assistant I've ever had. Win-win situation." Setting her phone aside, Rebecca nestled closer to Marcus, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified that her mistakes had cost her everything that mattered. Now she understood that sometimes the most devastating experiences could become the foundation for the most meaningful growth. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked quietly, his fingers absently stroking her hair. "Just how different everything is from where I thought we'd be," Rebecca replied honestly. 6 months ago, I was so afraid of losing you, of losing our family, that I nearly destroyed it trying to hold on." Marcus closed his book and shifted slightly so he could look at her face. "And now? Now I know that real love, real partnership can survive truth, even uncomfortable truth, even truth that hurts." Rebecca met his eyes, seeing the same love there that had sustained them through their darkest months. "I know that we're stronger when we face problems together instead of trying to protect each other from them." "It wasn't easy," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of their recent history. "There were days when I wasn't sure we'd make it through, days when the hurt felt bigger than the love." Rebecca nodded, remembering the counseling sessions where they'd both said things that were painful but necessary. The conversations where Marcus had expressed his anger and disappointment, and she'd had to sit with those feelings without defending herself or making excuses. The gradual, sometimes painful process of learning to trust each other again. "But we did make it through," she said softly. "We did," Marcus agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I think we're going to keep making it through, whatever comes next." As they sat together in the lamplight of their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, family photos, children's artwork, books they'd read together, Rebecca felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with authenticity. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months earlier, so desperate to appear perfect that she'd been willing to lie to the people she loved most. That woman had been driven by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointment, fear of not being enough. The woman she was now had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that asking for help was not failure, that being honest about struggles was not the same as being broken. She'd learned that the love of good people could survive imperfection, and that relationships built on truth were infinitely more satisfying than those built on carefully managed appearances. "Marcus?" she said softly. Thank you for fighting for us, for not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for finally trusting me enough to tell the truth, for letting me be your partner instead of trying to carry everything alone." Outside their window, the neighborhood was settling into quiet for the night, just as it had 6 months earlier when Rebecca had lain awake consumed by guilt and fear. But tonight, she would sleep peacefully beside her husband, her conscience clear, her heart full of gratitude for second chances and the transformative power of honest love. The story that had begun with a desperate lie had become a testimony to the healing power of truth. Rebecca's confession hadn't destroyed her marriage. It had revealed what their relationship was truly made of, stripping away pretense to expose the solid foundation of genuine love and commitment beneath. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Rebecca's last conscious thought was a prayer of thanksgiving for the painful grace that had broken her perfect facade and revealed the beautiful, imperfect, authentic life that had been waiting underneath all along. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose truth over comfort, honesty over appearance. But she would face them with her partner beside her, her children thriving around her, and the hard-won knowledge that she was strong enough to live authentically, whatever the cost. The housewife's confession had ended, but the real story, the story of a marriage rebuilt on truth, a family strengthened by honesty, and a woman who had learned to value authenticity over perfection, was just beginning. The end. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if my story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next confession. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and share it with another woman who needs to know she's not alone. Together, our voices are stronger.